From early childhood, Elena Morozova had been known as the brightest girl in her class. Teachers admired her sharp mind, her calm reasoning, and the rare ability to solve complicated problems without raising her voice or seeking attention. They often told her parents that she would grow into a remarkable professional, perhaps a lawyer, an architect, or even the director of some large organization. Elena would smile politely when she heard such predictions, yet deep inside, she dreamed not of titles or prestige, but of a quiet home filled with warmth. In her final year of school, two boys showed particular interest in her. One was Daniel, a thoughtful and slightly awkward classmate who admired her intelligence and respected her independence. The other was Mark Sullivan, tall, confident, and effortlessly charming. Mark played football, drove his father's old pickup truck, and carried himself with the kind of boldness that dazzled young hearts. Elena, like many girls her age, was drawn to confidence. She believed strength and decisiveness meant reliability. When Mark began walking her home and speaking of grand plans for the future, she allowed herself to fall in love. They married young, despite gentle warnings from her parents that haste rarely leads to wisdom. Mark found work at a manufacturing plant on the outskirts of Brookdale, a modest town surrounded by rolling hills and farmland. He started as a shift supervisor, proud to wear his uniform and carry a ring of factory keys on his belt. Elena, who had been accepted into a prestigious university, declined her place. She told herself that education could wait. A family could not. Within 3 years, Elena gave birth to twin daughters, Sophie and Clara. Motherhood filled her days and reshaped her ambitions. She learned to live by the rhythm of nap times, bottles, laundry, and lullabies. The small house they rented near the river became her entire world. Mark worked long shifts, sometimes overnight. When he returned home, he would collapse onto the sofa, exhausted and smelling faintly of oil and metal. Elena never complained. She believed love meant endurance. Time passed, and the twins grew stronger and more independent. Elena found brief hours of quiet in the afternoons when they attended preschool. It was during this period that tragedy struck. Her grandmother, the woman who had practically raised her and taught her everything from baking bread to managing household accounts, passed away after a short illness. The old woman had lived in a charming cottage by Willow Creek, a peaceful place with white shutters and a large apple tree in the yard.
Elena grievet deeply.
The cottage held her childhood memories, summer mornings picking berries, evenings listening to stories about resilience and dignity. Her parents, already settled in another city, did not wish to maintain the property. After many sleepless nights, Elena made a difficult decision. With her parents' blessing, she sold the cottage. It was not a crumbling structure but a well-kept home in a desirable location, and the sale brought in a considerable sum. Instead of placing the money into savings, Elena saw an opportunity. She had always possessed a talent for organization and creative thinking. While caring for the twins, she had noticed a lack of reliable childcare centers in Brookdale. Many parents struggled to balance work and family life. Using the proceeds from the sale, she rented a renovated building downtown and opened a small early learning center called Little Horizons. Mark initially laughed at the idea. He believed small-town ventures rarely succeeded. Yet Elena worked tirelessly, designing programs, hiring certified staff, meeting parents personally. Her calm professionalism inspired trust. Within a year, Little Horizons expanded from 10 children to 40. Within 3 years, it became one of the most respected childcare facilities in the county. As the business grew, so did the family's income. Mark left the factory and joined the company as operations manager. Elena trusted him completely. She believed shared success would strengthen their marriage. Together they purchased a larger home on a quiet street lined with maple trees. They traded the old pickup for a sleek black SUV. Family vacations to the coast became an annual tradition. Outwardly, everything appeared perfect. But success can reveal cracks that hardship conceals. Mark began to change. No longer the humble shift supervisor, he now introduced himself as co-owner of a thriving enterprise. He enjoyed networking events and business dinners. Compliments from clients and employees inflated his ego. Elena, meanwhile, divided her time between strategic planning and parenting. Though she tried to maintain her appearance, exhaustion often won. She preferred practical clothes and tied-back hair over fashionable outfits. One evening, after returning from a conference in the city, Mark studied her silently across the dinner table. The twins were laughing about school, unaware of the tension thickening the air. "You should think about updating your style," he said casually. "You represent a business now." Elena looked up, surprised. "I thought I was doing well enough." "I'm just saying," he shrugged. "Presentation matters." The comment lingered long after the dishes were washed. Over the following months, Mark insisted on handling more financial responsibilities. He persuaded Elena to transfer certain accounts into his name for efficiency. She trusted him without hesitation. After all, they were partners. He attended more late meetings, claiming negotiations with potential investors. Sometimes he returned home long past midnight. Elena focused increasingly on the twins, helping with homework, attending school events, volunteering for community projects. She believed family required attention, especially as adolescence approached. 2 months later, Mark began spending weekends, reviewing contracts. He purchased expensive suits and cologne. Elena noticed unfamiliar perfume lingering faintly on his jackets, but dismissed her suspicions as insecurity. Then, one autumn night, as golden leaves gathered along the sidewalk outside their home, Mark delivered words that shattered the fragile illusion of harmony. "I need something different," he said bluntly. "Someone who reflects where I am now." Elena felt the room tilt. "What are you talking about?" "I've outgrown this version of my life," he replied. "You're dependable. But I need excitement. Image. Presence." She stared at him, unable to reconcile the man before her with the boy who once promised forever by the river. He proposed what he considered a generous arrangement. She could keep the house. He would retain control of the company and vehicle. It was, in his words, a practical division. Practical. Within weeks, he moved into a modern apartment downtown with a young marketing assistant named Vanessa, whose glossy photographs frequently adorned the company's social media pages. Vanessa possessed effortless glamour and an easy laugh. She knew nothing of budgets or curriculum development, but she knew how to stand beside Mark at corporate functions and smile. Elena did not fight publicly. She retained dignity, focusing on her daughters and quietly consulting a legal advisor. She discovered that many financial transfers had been executed without her full understanding. Though painful, the revelation ignited something within her, an ember of determination inherited from the grandmother whose cottage had funded it all. Meanwhile, Mark reveled in his perceived freedom. Yet beneath the polished surface, little horizons began to falter. Administrative errors increased. Long-standing staff members resigned. Parents sensed instability. Competitors noticed opportunity. Mark dismissed early warning signs, convinced that charisma could substitute confidence. He had forgotten who built the foundation. Elena, observing from a distance, made no impulsive moves. Instead, she began studying market trends, reconnecting with former partners, and quietly planning her next step. She no longer saw herself as merely a wife or even a betrayed spouse. She saw herself as a strategist who had once underestimated her own resilience. The house by the river was gone, but its lessons remained. The first weeks after the separation passed in a haze of disbelief for Elena. The house felt strangely hollow without Mark's heavy footsteps echoing through the hallway or the sound of his car pulling into the driveway late at night. Yet what surprised her most was not loneliness, it was clarity. For years she had shaped her life around someone else's comfort. Now, for the first time since she was 18, she woke each morning without adjusting herself to another person's expectations. Sophie and Clara sensed the shift in the household. Though still young, they understood enough to ask difficult questions. Elena answered carefully, never poisoning their minds against their father. Sometimes adults lose their way, she would say gently. But that doesn't mean they stop being your parents. The twins nodded, though confusion lingered in their eyes. Meanwhile, downtown in his glass-walled apartment, Mark was living the version of success he had once imagined. Vanessa filled the space with perfume, glossy magazines, and carefully staged photographs. She loved restaurants with dim lighting and rooftop bars where city lights shimmered like spilled diamonds. Mark enjoyed the admiration he received when he entered a room with her on his arm. She embodied the image he believed he deserved. At first, business continued steadily. The company's name still carried weight in Brookdale. Contracts signed during Elena's leadership remained active. But subtle cracks widened quickly. Mark approached operations differently. Where Elena had cultivated trust and long-term relationships, he chased expansion and visibility. He invested in flashy advertising campaigns and rebranded the company's website without consulting the senior staff. Vanessa, eager to contribute, suggested modernizing the daycare's aesthetic, replacing warm colors and hand-painted murals with sleek minimalist decor. Parents began to whisper. Little Horizons had once felt like a second home for their children. Now it resembled a corporate franchise. Familiar teachers resigned after clashing with Mark's management style. Payroll errors caused frustration. A licensing renewal was delayed due to incomplete paperwork, something Elena would never have overlooked. Mark blamed stress. He blamed staff incompetence. He blamed market saturation. What he did not blame was himself. Across town, Elena remained quiet but far from inactive. Shortly after the divorce papers were finalized, she scheduled a consultation with a financial attorney in the neighboring city. The review of documents revealed that while Mark had transferred many operational accounts into his name, the original intellectual property filings and educational program designs were registered under Elena's authorship. More importantly, the initial capital investment, the funds from her grandmother's cottage, had been documented as a personal contribution prior to Mark's involvement. The discovery did not immediately restore what she had lost, but it provided leverage. Instead of launching into open conflict, Elena took a different path. She rented a modest office space near the university campus and began drafting a proposal for a new venture. Unlike Little Horizons, which had focused solely on childcare, her new concept integrated early education with parental development workshops and after-school enrichment programs. She named it Bright Harbor Initiative. The idea was ambitious, blending community engagement with structured learning in a way that addressed gaps she had observed over the years. To bring the vision to life, she reached out to someone she had not spoken to in a long time, Daniel Harper. He had remained in Brookdale after school, eventually becoming a certified educational psychologist. Their reunion was cautious at first, built on professionalism rather than nostalgia. Daniel listened carefully as Elena outlined her plan. He asked thoughtful questions, offered constructive feedback, and agreed to collaborate as an academic advisor. Working alongside Daniel reminded Elena of the steadiness she once overlooked. He did not flatter her. He respected her. He saw her intellect before her appearance. While Elena laid foundations quietly, Mark's empire began to tremble more visibly. A new competitor emerged in the region, a well-funded childcare network expanding from the capital. Their facilities were modern, yet retained the warmth that Little Horizons had abandoned. Several of Mark's largest corporate clients shifted their employee childcare contracts to the new provider after repeated complaints about declining service quality. Mark attempted damage control. He scheduled meetings, promised improvements, even offered discounts. But reputation, once fractured, is difficult to restore. Vanessa grew restless. The expensive dinners became less frequent. Mark's temper shortened. Instead of arriving home with gifts, he brought spreadsheets filled with losses. When he suggested cutting discretionary spending, Vanessa reacted sharply. She had not signed up for austerity. One evening, after receiving notice that a major partnership had been terminated, Mark returned to the apartment to find Vanessa packing a suitcase. "This isn't what you promised," she said coldly. "I need stability." He tried to argue, but she had already made her decision. By morning, she was gone. Alone in the silent apartment, Mark confronted an unfamiliar sensation: vulnerability. For the first time since leaving his marriage, he wondered whether he had mistaken appearance for substance. Back at Bright Harbor Initiative, progress accelerated. Elena secured a small business grant from a regional development program aimed at supporting women entrepreneurs. Daniel connected her with faculty members interested in community outreach. Within 6 months, she had assembled a team of educators, therapists, and volunteers. The facility they renovated was not luxurious, but it radiated intention. Sunlight streamed through large windows onto reading corners filled with books. Art supplies lined the walls. Parents attended weekend seminars on child psychology and financial literacy. Word spread quickly. Families who had once trusted Little Horizons began visiting Bright Harbor. Some recognized Elena and expressed quiet admiration for her resilience. She responded graciously, never speaking ill of Mark. The legal turning point arrived unexpectedly. Due to persistent operational negligence, Little Horizons failed a compliance audit. The governing board, still legally structured under the original founding documents, convened to reassess leadership. Because Elena retained partial ownership rights tied to the founding capital and intellectual property, she was invited to attend the meeting. Mark walked into the boardroom expecting confrontation. Instead, he found composure. Elena presented data calmly, outlining systemic issues and proposing a structured acquisition plan. Bright Harbor Initiative would absorb Little Horizons under a revised governance model, preserving jobs for remaining staff and stabilizing services for families. It was not revenge. It was strategy. Mark realized too late that he had underestimated the woman he dismissed as simple. Negotiations were tense, but efficient. Facing mounting debts and no viable recovery plan, Mark agreed to the merger terms. He relinquished majority control in exchange for a structured exit settlement that covered outstanding liabilities, but left little else. When the documents were signed, Elena did not celebrate. She felt something quieter: closure. That evening, she returned home to Sophie and Clara, who were preparing a school presentation at the kitchen table. Daniel had stopped by earlier to drop off materials for an upcoming workshop. The house felt warm, alive, balanced. Across town, Mark packed the last of his belongings from the office he once dominated. The sleek desk, the framed certificates, the illusion of grandeur. They meant little now. He understood that leadership was not about image or applause. It was about stewardship. As he stepped outside into the cool evening air, he noticed the maple trees lining the street, their leaves turning gold. For the first time, he saw not what he had lost materially, but what he had squandered emotionally. The tide had turned. Autumn in Brookdale arrived quietly that year, as if the town itself wished to avoid disturbing the fragile balance that had finally settled over the Morozova household. The maple trees lining Elena's street burned in shades of amber and crimson, and the air carried that crisp scent of change which always seemed to promise both endings and beginnings at once. Bright Harbor Initiative had been operating under its expanded structure for nearly a year. The merger with Little Horizons had not been easy, but it had been transformative. Elena had insisted on restoring what once made the original center beloved: warmth, attentiveness, genuine relationships. The sleek gray walls Mark had installed were repainted in soft colors. The hand-painted murals were recreated, this time by local art students. Teachers who had left returned after hearing about the new leadership. Parents felt the difference almost immediately. Elena's days were full, yet no longer frantic. She had learned something crucial during the collapse of her marriage: exhaustion is not a badge of honor. She reorganized responsibilities within the company, delegated intelligently, and protected her evenings for Sophie and Clara. The twins, now approaching their teenage years, were thriving. They were perceptive girls, quick to laugh, but equally quick to detect insincerity. The experience of their parents' separation had matured them in ways Elena sometimes wished it had not, yet it had also drawn them closer to her. Daniel Harper had gradually become more than a professional partner. He never rushed her, never pressed her with declarations or expectations. Instead, he showed up consistently. He attended school performances when Elena was caught in meetings. He fixed a leaking faucet without making a spectacle of it. He discussed books with the twins and listened carefully to their opinions. His presence was not loud, but it was steady, and steadiness, Elena had learned, was rarer than charm. Meanwhile, Mark's life had narrowed significantly. After relinquishing control of the company, he struggled to secure comparable employment. His resume still reflected managerial experience, but word of the business decline followed him quietly. Brookdale was not a large town. Reputations traveled quickly. He accepted a mid-level operations position at a logistics warehouse 30 miles away. The salary covered basic expenses, but left little room for indulgence. The downtown apartment was replaced by a smaller rental unit on the outskirts of the neighboring city. The SUV had been sold to settle debts. The polished suits remained in his closet, but they no longer matched his reality. In the evenings, he often sat alone at the kitchen table, replaying conversations in his mind, particularly the one in which he had told Elena she was no longer suitable for his status. The memory now felt absurd. At first, he blamed circumstance. He told himself the market had shifted unexpectedly, that competitors had played unfairly, that Vanessa had abandoned him at his lowest point. But solitude has a way of stripping away convenient narratives. Without distraction, he was forced to confront uncomfortable truths. He had equated admiration with respect. He had confused attention with loyalty. Most painfully, he had dismissed the very person who had built his success. Months passed before he gathered the courage to contact his daughters. His initial messages were cautious, asking about school and hobbies. Sophie responded politely but briefly. Clara remained distant. It was not hatred they felt, but disappointment. Children forgive many things, yet they do not easily forget betrayal directed at the parent who stayed. Eventually, Elena agreed to supervised visits in neutral settings. She did not speak ill of Mark in front of the girls. She believed consequences should teach without poisoning. The first meeting took place at a public park near the river where she and Mark had once walked as newlyweds. The symmetry was not lost on either of them. Mark arrived early, nervous in a way he had not felt since adolescence. When Sophie and Clara approached, he stood awkwardly, unsure whether to hug them. They allowed a brief embrace. Conversation was stilted at first, revolving around school projects and extracurricular activities. Yet beneath the surface, something fragile began to rebuild. Not the old illusion of a perfect family, but a quieter acknowledgement of shared history. After the girls wandered toward the playground, Mark and Elena found themselves standing side by side beneath a willow tree. The river moved steadily behind them. "I was wrong," he said finally, the words heavy but sincere.
About you.
"About everything." Elena did not respond immediately. She watched the water instead.
"We were both young," she said at last.
"But choices still matter." "I thought success meant being admired," he admitted. "I didn't realize it meant being responsible." She nodded. Responsibility is rarely glamorous. There was no dramatic reconciliation, no sudden reversal of time. What existed between them now was something more mature, an understanding shaped by consequence. Elena had no desire to return to what had broken her. She had rebuilt herself not through revenge, but through clarity. Mark, for the first time, recognized that strength does not always announce itself loudly. As winter approached, Bright Harbor launched a community scholarship program funded by a partnership Elena secured with a regional foundation. The initiative provided early education access to families who could not otherwise afford it. At the opening ceremony, Elena stood before a modest crowd in the renovated auditorium. Daniel and the twins sat in the front row. She spoke not about personal triumph, but about collective resilience, the power of communities to support one another, the importance of investing in future generations. Her voice was calm, confident, unmistakably her own. Later that evening, as snow began to fall lightly over Brookdale, Elena returned home to find Sophie and Clara decorating the living room with handmade paper snowflakes. Daniel was in the kitchen attempting, somewhat unsuccessfully, to bake bread using her grandmother's old recipe. Flour dusted the countertop and his sleeves. Elena laughed, a full, unguarded sound she had not made in years. In that moment, she understood something essential. Happiness was not the grand house, the luxury car, or the admiration of strangers. It was this: imperfect bread, children's laughter, a partner who respected her mind, and the quiet knowledge that she had not allowed bitterness to define her. Mark, in his small apartment miles away, watched the same snowfall through a narrow window. He thought about the river, about the willow tree, about the cottage Elena had once sold to build their dream. Only now did he comprehend the weight of that sacrifice. Regret, he realized, is a slow teacher. It does not shout. It lingers. Over time, his relationship with the twins improved gradually. He attended school events, kept promises, learned to listen more than he spoke. He stopped trying to impress and started trying to understand. Redemption did not restore his former life, but it reshaped his character. Years later, when Sophie prepared to leave for university and Clara spoke of studying environmental science, both parents stood in the same auditorium during graduation. They did not stand together, but they stood peacefully. The journey that had fractured their family had also transformed it. Elena never returned to the girl who chose security over ambition. She became someone far stronger, someone who understood that love without respect erodes, that trust without awareness blinds, and that dignity, once reclaimed, must be guarded carefully. Mark never regained the illusion of effortless superiority. Instead, he gained something humbler and more durable: accountability. The house by the river was long gone. The marriage that began with youthful certainty had ended. Yet what remained was not only loss. What remained was growth carved from consequence, wisdom born of error, and the quiet reminder that what we fail to value today may become the very thing we mourn tomorrow. And in Brookdale, as seasons continued their patient rotation, life moved forward, steady as the river, indifferent to pride, but generous to those willing to learn.